Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Last commission meeting of this council. Apologies for absence. I have none. I hope it will be apologies for lateness from Councillor Dehaney, and welcome Councillor McLean joining us remotely. Hope commiserations, Nick, on your testing positive. Declarations of pecuniary interest. There being none, and the minutes of our previous meeting, I've asked for one addition in the item on repurposing the high streets. At the end, I want to add the sentence that will read, the chair explained that only the summary of the report had been circulated. The report to Cabinet includes sections on each of the 5 high streets plus the SWOT analysis, because otherwise it doesn't make clear that what's gone to Cabinet is in fact the full report and not the somewhat summary version that you saw. So that apart, are people happy with the accuracy of the minutes? Okay, thank you. So in a reversal of the order I gave you just a moment ago, Peter, I'm going to ask you to lead on your item, and hopefully the Borough Commander will be joining us shortly. Peter, can I ask you just take 5 minutes to introduce it and allow plenty of time then for questions and discussion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, councillors. I'm Peter Clifton, Interim Head of Service for Safer Merton. The report, which is the report providing an update on antisocial behaviour, looks at the overall patterns and trends in terms of antisocial behaviour, and also what Safer Merton, the council and the partnership has been doing to tackle antisocial behaviour. There's a number of sections. The first summarises some of the feedback we've received from residents through the consultation activity, from which it's clear that antisocial behaviour is a significant concern for local residents, as is the case across most boroughs in London. The second section looks at the antisocial behaviour data, including looking at the increase in volume of reports we've seen in antisocial behaviour cases from residents during the pandemic period. Although the monthly level of reports has dropped somewhat from the peak that we saw during last year, it still hasn't come down yet to the pre-pandemic periods. The third section looks at what we've been doing to tackle antisocial behaviour. That is very much a multi-agency approach. It looks at the work which goes on at the Community MARAC panel and the Locations Board, which bring together a range of partners, including police, including different services across the council, including the probation service, health services, social care, to tackle both individual cases of antisocial behaviour and also look at locations which emerge as hotspots of antisocial behaviour. There's also a breakdown of specific partnership activity which has been taking place. That includes over 1,500 reports of antisocial behaviour investigated by the Safer Merton team, over 60 cases referred to the Community MARAC for multi-agency problem-solving work. How we've been using CCTV to help tackle and reduce antisocial behaviour. That's included putting some additional cameras in antisocial behaviour hotspots and environmental crime hotspots. Over 29% of incidents captured by our CCTV cameras relate to either antisocial behaviour or environmental crime, and that's helping provide evidence for enforcement action. We also look at some of the tools and powers and enforcement powers we've been using, including the community protection notices and enforcement within the public space protection order, which is focused on alcohol-related antisocial behaviour. And the report also provides some details on some of the work with the Met's Designing Out Crime team to implement crime prevention measures. For example, on the Phipps Bridge estate, which is that work's currently being evaluated at the moment. and also the ongoing work at Wandle Park looking to implement safety improvement measures. There's also information on the community engagement activity. The 400 plus neighbourhood watchers form a significant part of that, as do all of the police safer neighbourhood teams, each one of which has antisocial behaviour as one of their priorities. There are 6 case studies included, which range from use of enforcement powers, use of CCTV, community engagement, and designing out crime work as well. And then the final section outlines the next steps, which will form much of the focus of the work of Safer Merton in the year ahead, to make sure that we continue to deliver a multi-agency response to antisocial behaviour, which seeks to reduce the risk to victims, prevent and deter antisocial behaviour from occurring, and take enforcement action against people responsible for antisocial behaviour. I must conclude, councillors, by drawing your attention to an error and apologising for that error. That is at point 1.34, page 21. I'll just give a moment for you to turn to that page. It's on the table that provides the data on the London ambulance call-outs for alcohol-related calls, and the labels in the first column are the wrong way round. So it's actually the wards in the PSPO, which should be in the bottom row of that table, and they did not see an increase in the call-outs. It's the wards outside the PSPO which saw the increase. So I'm sorry for that error, and I'll make sure it's included in the errata. That concludes the summary. So of course, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I thought you were going to point out on the error in mistaking biennial when you really meant biennial. But so I would point out that our annual resident survey takes place every 2 years, although we call it that for some reason. And both surveys are in fact conducted once every 2 years, not twice a year. But that apart. Okay, I know I'm an old pedant. Questions for Peter, points you'd like to discuss? Sally, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I just got it highlighted, and it's to do with the fines you charge. You talk on page 22, 1.42, and you then cite incidences of November, a van. So are these people who you caught? My question is, are these people who you caught? And I know on the Wandle Road, Willow Lane rather, where I sometimes walk the dog, I've seen people fly tipping, too frightened, my friend and I too frightened to challenge these 2 men, but supplied the registration number and the van and what they dumped, but never heard back from anything. So I don't know if you follow up issues like that. And so you do not take an individual's report is one question. And the other one is the cases you listed, were they fined? And if they're fined, what do you do with this money generated from the fines? How is it used? Is it used to further develop CCTV and such like? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. So for clarity, the enforcement of fly tipping and environmental offences takes place under the public spaces team and their enforcement team, not Safer Merton. But Safer Merton seeks to support that work by, where there are hotspots that are identified for fly tipping, putting in temporary cameras to try to increase the probability of catching some footage that can be used as evidence. We then provide that footage to the enforcement team within public spaces. I believe in terms of those examples listed, enforcement action was taken. Usually that would involve a fine. I don't know relation to those specific cases, the exact details of that. Overall, the public spaces team for littering and fly tipping, the amount of fines that they issue across the borough in a year is in the thousands. But for some of the fly tipping hotspots, it can be quite difficult to catch the perpetrators. So that's why we seek to support that with the CCTV. And one further thing I should mention is we've recently, we've got 8 additional redeployable cameras. So we'll be looking to install some of those in some of the fly tipping hotspots to help with that work as well.
So, Chair, if I could just, so the money, the income that comes in from fines, is that used to further develop?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, but I can take that back to my colleagues in public spaces and come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter, for your report. This £1.2 million upgrade of our CCTV camera network, what does that mean? Does that mean we're changing old cameras for new cameras? Does it mean we're getting more cameras in, you know, places that are needed? Because previously, when I've asked about a particular location where anecdotally I'm aware of a large number of antisocial behaviour sort of incidents, we've had a camera located there for a short amount of time. The incident sort of antisocial incidents have decreased, presumably deterred by the camera. The camera's then, you know, it's considered a success. The camera's then moved away, and I've been told that that's because obviously the camera's needed somewhere else. With the camera now having been moved away, that area's once again become a, you know, a place where certainly a number of young women have told me that they don't feel safe using this particular, you know, bridge. So I suppose I'm asking about this 1.2 million upgrade. Is it about old cameras being replaced with new cameras, or is it more cameras? And how are you confident that that's the best use of that money for the CCTV? Thanks.
Thank you. So I would start off with the context. I think we have got a very effective CCTV service. They capture around 3,500 incidents a year, and of which that results in around 600 pieces of evidence either being shared with police or different teams in the council for investigation or enforcement. But the equipment is aged, it is old, and so it could be, you know, even more effective than it is. So a lot of the upgrade is around renewing that, not renewing, that's misleading, is around replacing that equipment, that old equipment with new technology, analog cameras with the digital cameras, not just the cameras, but the network as well that connects the cameras. That may involve an increase in the use of wireless technology, for example, as opposed to simply hard fiber. That also lends itself then to increase in flexibility in terms of where we can deploy the cameras at a sort of more economical cost. So part of it is, or a lot of the upgrade is about coming up to date with the latest cameras. There'll be better definition, better quality, better evidence capture, but it's also an opportunity for us to look at the disposition of the cameras across the borough. Are they in the right place? Do we need to sort of move and adjust? And finally, it's also about increasing the, in terms of the type of cameras, you've got this, your sort of permanent fixed cameras, but then you also have the more deployable ones that you can put up on lampposts, for example. Part of this upgrade will be about increasing the number of those deployable ones, because we find them tactically very useful to address exactly the sort of issues you're raising, where they're needed, when they're needed, to try and have that impact. And it is a fixed resource, but if we can increase that and actually help reduce crime and antisocial behaviour at more locations, that's what we want to do. That has already started with the 8 additional cameras I mentioned, which will be going up in the next sort of 2-3 months. But then there'll be more that follow throughout the course of the upgrade.
Many people think that employing cameras, particularly for fly tippers, would solve the problem overnight. And I always say to people, look, there's a cost involved. And because we have experienced cuts in our budgets, we can't just put cameras everywhere. Now, is it a question of cost? Why, there are not enough cameras around? Or, it is a difficulty in operating them when you put them up?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, certainly, I think that, that there's a balance in terms of costs and also in terms of the desirability of you could go too far and have sort of try to have cameras everywhere. That would come at an extreme high financial cost, but also there's implications to think of in terms of the proportionality of having that surveillance everywhere. So what we want to do is make sure we've got the assets that we've got, the cameras that we've got in the right places, in the best places, and that's why we look at the crime data, we look at the antisocial behaviour data, we look at whatever information we can to try to understand these are the locations most in need of the cameras. The 1.2 million investment, I think, will help us be even more effective in terms of how the CCTV works.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Peter, for your report. I've got three quick, hopefully quick follow-up questions for you. On building off Billy's question, I'm hoping, can you just expand on? I mean, you gave us a great answer on kit, but can you expand what capability this actually will give us? I just want to understand, what that does. If there's any server-side improvements or any software improvements as well, that'd be helpful to understand in terms of how that helps us use these images to catch culprits and link A to B together. Second question on normalization of data. I mean, it's really, really helpful to have this in terms of the reports by ward, but given the populations of every ward is slightly different, and given the number of reporting and the propensity report is slightly different, what methods have you used to normalize the data so that we're looking at apples and apples rather than comparing apples and pears? And lastly, you referenced task and finish groups on page 14, and you talked about ad hoc group setup. Are they all, how are they doing? Is there a program sort of RAG rating for them? It'd be just great to just add some flavor to that.
Certainly, Councillor, thank you. In terms of the difference the upgrade will make for the capabilities of the cameras, probably the main one is the improved definition of the footage, improved quality. That will help with identification of suspects. That will help with better quality of evidence that can then be more effective at securing convictions. And the other aspect I would say is the fact that it will be easier to deploy cameras to locations more flexibly, because we'll be able to make more use of the wireless technology. So that can mean a quicker sort of turnaround in terms of getting a camera in, and it can also mean lower costs per camera if you've got a sort of hotspot to deploy to. The question in relation to the normalization of data, the ward data you see in there isn't normalized for population. That's something I'll be happy to take away and sort of do a piece on that. To provide that normalized data, which should hopefully be informative. And in relation to the ad hoc task and finish groups, problem-solving groups, they report back to either the community MARAC if it's in relation to an individual case, or to the locations board if it's in relation to a hotspot. So they don't just sort of sit alone and nobody's got that oversight of them. And I think what I've seen over the last 6 months, I'm seeing increasing signs of positive outcomes from those task and finish groups. We've seen recent examples in Mitcham, for example, where there were unlicensed music events taking place, and we saw good swift partnership action supported by police, supported by the Safe Merton team, planning enforcement and environmental services team. 2 recent occasions where they acted swiftly and got positive results. And that's just 2 examples, but I would say generally I'm seeing increasingly positive results from those task and finish groups.
Could I come to Mansoor, your question, please, Mansoor?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thank Peter for the summary. As per the CSS report, graffiti and vandalism, which are 42%, were the top types of antisocial behavior concerns. my question is that what is the present situation of these vandalism and graffiti, and what measures Morton has taken to reduce these?
So, in terms of in terms of the top types of antisocial behaviour concern, looking at the cases that were reported to the Safe and Merton team, general sort of ASB within a location, which is termed as area misuse, was one of the main types, and that could include people setting fireworks, groups gathering, being disorderly. Often we saw a link being made to concerns around alcohol-related antisocial behaviour, or also drug-related antisocial behaviour as well. But it can sort of, there's a wide range of issues that the reports can take. We did notice during the lockdown period there was an increase in reports relating to neighbourhood disputes, and that's somewhat different from sort of the town centre antisocial behaviour that I've just described. And quite a few of the cases that are worked on in the community MARAC recently have involved those neighbourhood disputes. So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour, Councillor.
Thank you.
Your question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Pierre. There's a point in the next steps page on 28 that's about the direct casework support for victims, and it's prompting me to ask a bit about how things are communicated with the public, either the direct victims of antisocial behaviour, any follow-up with them, what are the kind of main strategies in the partnership that you do? If there's broad examples you can give, that would be useful. But also, when there aren't direct victims, are there any communications when there has been a particularly big or significant event on a street or in an area, about letting the residents know there that at least you know about it, and then perhaps a couple of things about what you're doing. And I suppose a separate but connected part of that is you speak a little bit here about either vulnerable individuals that are at risk of being victims of antisocial behaviour, or severe effects of it, or there's an allusion here to actual taking part in antisocial behaviour. So communication in general, but to all these different parts, if you could just go through that a little bit for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I would say this is very much one of the key functions of the Community MARAC multi-agency panel. It brings together a range of partners, partly because that can then help with getting the right support and advice and engagement around the victim of antisocial behaviour. Sometimes that can be as simple as signposting the victim to support services, for example, victim support, which, as well as working with victims of crime, also work with victims of antisocial behaviour. Sometimes it might involve working with social care in terms of if there's safeguarding needs or care needs that may need support, and also working with our partners in the voluntary community and faith sector, for example, MSIL, who are also part of our community MARAC process, and whether the case is being led by Safe and Merton antisocial behaviour officers, they would have close engagement with the victim, as would be the case when the police are leading on a case. And again, the Safe and Neighbourhood team officers working on that case would have close engagement with the victim. And through the community MARAC, we try to make sure that victims don't sort of fall through the net, so to speak, in terms of that work and support. In terms of area-based issues, I think that's an area we can do more on in Safe and Merton and get better at in terms of getting that communication out there. Also about some of the, when we take action and based on the concerns that residents have put through to us, I think we can do more to get those good news stories out there, that we're listening, we are acting, and we're doing stuff to tackle the issues. I know the police do a tremendous amount of work in each of the 20 wards in terms of that area-based victim engagement. There's ward panels on every ward, and that's a key part of the Safe and Neighbour team's work, is having that sort of link with those local communities.
Thanks for this, Peter. I'm looking at the graph on page 9 and putting the first lockdown period to one side. This year, we're still something like 50% higher in ASB reports than we were 2 years ago. Is that still COVID issues, lockdown issues, or are there other things happening here? And how do we relate to other boroughs in that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I would say no. It's not COVID issues, and I know in terms of the I won't sort of speak, I suppose, in too much detail around the police reports, other than to say that certainly during the pandemic period, the lockdown periods, a lot of the increase seen in the police reported ASB figures were linked to COVID type breaches being reported. But Safer Merton itself, the council itself, saw an increase in ASB reports that weren't necessarily related to breaches, but was perhaps related to neighbourhood disputes, and some of that seemed to be perhaps because of the changes in sort of lifestyles that were happening. People were perhaps sort of bumping into each other a lot more, you know, as neighbours, and being in their sort of their streets or their house a lot more than they were. While we've seen the level of reports fall back from the peak that it was at, as you say, it hasn't fallen back to the pre-pandemic levels. And from what I'm seeing, it doesn't seem to be connected to COVID-related stuff per se. And I'm not sure the exact reason as why it hasn't fallen back. One possible hypothesis I have is that one of the things that happened during the pandemic was that a lot of people were more in contact or more aware of the work the local authorities were doing than they might otherwise have been, and that might be resulting in an increased likelihood for people to reach out and contact the local authority. But the honest answer there is I'm not 100% sure, but that's something we'll certainly be looking at and trying to understand better.
A question, Peter, on case study number 1, which is interesting, which is about the family from Held moving in on the street. And it's interesting that they didn't respond to initial warnings, and it's only when you got on to actually prosecuting, if I've understood this correctly, that the behaviour changed. I mean, I suppose the point there is that there is a cost attached to escalating that, isn't there? And why don't people respond to an initial warning? Or, that might sound a naive question, but anything you can tell us around that would be interesting.
But thank you, Councillor. Certainly, and I think we try to be proportionate with our enforcement and try to use the least powerful tool which will do the job, and then if it's not, then escalate accordingly. And in fact, in many cases, the initial warning, whether it's a community protection notice warning or on the police side an ASB first stage warning, it often does the job and is effective. And then it's only a sort of small minority of those cases that then perhaps the issue persists and you need to escalate to the next level. That may be why this one was selected as a case study, because it had that feature about it that perhaps made it more interesting. But sort of beneath that pyramid, if you like, there's many more cases where there was one initial warning and then that helped resolve the issue.
I've got one last thought here is that it seems to be maybe ASB reports were as much symptomatic of how people feel as an actual increase in the number of objectively determined incidents of ASB. And if we look at the annual resident survey, so it's called, it is apparent that people are in some respects more jittery and less happy about their lives. And the one figure I picked out, the number who claimed to feel anxious yesterday went from 8% to 20%. And conversely, the number who were happy yesterday went down. So in light of what's happened over the last 2 years, I think we do still have a rather more damaged society than perhaps we have yet fully acknowledged. Do you think ASB reports are partly symptomatic of how people are feeling about life?
I think it's very plausible that may be the case, and I think you're quite right to point out in terms of it's we often have to be cautious about interpreting a simple increase or decrease, and it may not necessarily simply be reflective of the prevalence changing to that degree. It could be around how confident people are to report, or people's thresholds for tolerance of issues in terms of antisocial behaviour type issues, or indeed, you know, they're I suppose, for example, conducting an activity like raising awareness about the work of the Safer Merton Partnership and the police, and that may result in more reporting, for example. So there's lots of causes and effect, and I think that's certainly something in terms of what effects we're still seeing in society from what we've been through over the last couple of years with the pandemic. I think that's something that not just Safer Merton, but the local authority more broadly, and I'm sure policing and other partners as well will want to look at, continue to look at closely and try and understand what's behind those trends.
So if we have no more questions for Peter, let me just thank you. I think it's clear you're going to continue to be busy. So we would appreciate you continuing to come to make reports to this body. Peter, you've got a
Chair, I don't have a question, but a comment, and it is that over the years I've been a member of this authority. I've tried to help a number of local residents who have problems with antisocial behaviour, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge the hard work of the team that are involved in this work and thank them because they can make a huge difference. And you know, this really does affect the lives of citizens in a really detrimental way, to the point where they are, you know, their health is and can be affected. And I think as a local authority, we are lucky to have such a team, and we should express our gratitude whenever we can.
Thank you indeed. Yeah, quite so. It is. We do know that ASB does affect people in quite profound ways, and we do need to do all we can to keep on top of it. And it is an uphill task, I think. But so thank you for all you're doing. Good. So let me move on and thank the Borough Commander for joining us on an inhospitable evening. Thank you, Lise, for coming along. Can I ask you first to give us a brief update on what's been going on in your world, and then we will take the written questions, see if people have any supplementaries to those.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chair. So, yeah, so it's been, I think most of what's been going on has been rehearsed in the press recently. But locally, I think we're in a fairly good place. So there's been some really nice crime reductions figures in some really important areas. We'll come on to it later, but there are obviously areas for improvement, particularly around our detection rates. We've had a fairly good period where we haven't lost many officers to police protests in central London. I know we've talked about that before. So most of the officers have been on the BCU and in Merton, and we've been able to, as we've discussed before, fill the many of the neighbourhood positions and schools officer positions as well. So I think we're in a fairly healthy place. I suppose the counterbalance to that, though, is that you'll have seen that we're recruiting heavily, and there's questions in the pack around the 20,000 officers. So what that means is it gives us a lot of inexperienced officers who are taking us quite a long time to get up to speed. But I'm happy to take questions and answer in more detail on the questions in the pack, and also answer on anything anyone may have read in the press and may have concerns about. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, if we take the written questions and answers, and as mine came up first, let me just ask, initiatives such as walk and run and talk, that sounds like 2 stages of multitasking too far for me, but how's that working out? What's your target audience for that? And is it actually working? You've got officers fit enough to keep up?
Oh, crikey. I won't start talking to you about my ultra running because it might put people to shame. But yes, no. So we've been doing walks and talks. Actually, all the boroughs in London have been doing them, and it's to address the issues in the violence against women and girls strategy. So what we find is that if officers and community members get to know each other as people, and they're out in their local area, then that builds confidence in policing in those individuals, and also in people that see them interacting. So actually every borough has got a walk and talk scheme, which is advertised on Eventbrite. But just to be different, Sarah Dobinson, your neighbourhood inspector, organised a talk and run where she was doing park runs and other runs with people that were interested. So just a little bit of borough one-upmanship, I think.
You had a written question. Do you want to follow up on that, or are you happy with the answer you got?
Well, I think the answer, Chair, is that the BCU commander doesn't know, and you know,
Which question is this?
This is it's in relation to.
Oh, you asked about the comparative.
Yes.
For the 2010. For 2010.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't. It wasn't easy to find those figures, and it didn't seem kind of proportionate to spend much time doing it. But you know, if you're trying to make the point that there were a lot more neighbourhood officers in the past, you're absolutely right. There were. Our current model, which follows the mayoral promise, is just to have those 2 dedicated ward officers and the PCSO in each ward. What I think is really encouraging, because neighbourhood policing is really important to me, is that in all of the commentary coming out, for example, the strategic review of policing, the Police Foundation report, it all really emphasises the importance of neighbourhood policing. So I do think that we might see a rise, but of course it's you know, police officer numbers in themselves are a very political issue.
Chair, if I could continue with my supplementary, it was to say, would it surprise you to learn that there were double the number of officers on the ground in Ravensbury ward at that time?
No, it wouldn't. No, I think the model was called 3-2-1. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I, if it were up to me, I would have that tomorrow. But unfortunately, we're not resourced for that. And, you know, 20 wards in Merton, 74 across the BCU. Those are extra officers that I don't have, unfortunately.
Well, I thank you for confirming what my memory was telling me. And I think, you know, you've said that if it were up to you, you would have them back. I think I'd like to advise you that if it were up to the residents of Ravensbury ward, they too would like to see you with increased resources.
I've got a number of questions from the Conservative group. I don't know whether evidence of groupthink. Are there any, Thomas, any points you want to follow through there on?
Yeah, there's a couple I'd follow up on, and then Nick may have some as well. Just on the answers on the theft of bikes and catalytic converters. Do you have? You mentioned hotspots in the answer, and you may not be able to go into too much detail, but is that a sort of borough-wide problem? Sorry, thinking the catalytic converters rather than the bikes particularly. Is that a borough-wide problem, or is that something that's being seen in certain areas? And also, I know particularly in some wards, in my own ward included, there's been a lot of work with the Safer Neighbourhood team in terms of making people aware of the carless key theft, as well of, you know, cars parked on drives that are being taken. Just wondered if you could give an update on how that's gone, because I know there's been a lot of activity in terms of both giving people the means to prevent that, but also just to raise the information. So if you, both of those would be helpful, please.
Yeah. So the catalytic converter thefts across the BCU and in Merton are concentrated in areas that are more affluent than other areas. And typically the organised criminal groups that are carrying out these thefts go from pocket to pocket. So we typically find that particular areas aren't usually repeat venues often. But as you say, our best weapon is crime prevention. So in addition to the packs that we can get from the manufacturers with this additional bolt, essentially to bolt on the catalytic converter, we also do operations where we go and visit scrap metal dealers where we know that they would be a market for that. So that's helpful. And also, there's lots of other related theft as well. So theft of number plates is fairly typical as well. So now the manufacturers are developing, again, this different kind of tamper-proof screw. And so we've been doing a number of kind of free kits for those across the borough and BCU. And as you say, bite marking as well. So those are the tools that we have, as well as obviously trying to disrupt the organised criminal groups, but they're working across London, so it's quite difficult to predict where they might be.
Thank you. That's helpful, just bouncing around the subjects, but the answer about the particular locations where women feel unsafe in the borough, just when appreciate your examining the data. Were you able to give an indication when you might be able to kind of report back on that at some point?
Yeah, so we're waiting for a fuller report from the Home Office on the data they've got, which I understand is going to be April, and then we'll look at that further, because although it's been reasonably well used and it can supplement the information that the council's got as well, it's still not necessarily rich enough in terms of figures to give us as much information as we want. And then just I've got some more figures for vehicle crime and so on, if anyone needs those as well, but they're readily available.
On the issue of where women feel unsafe, I commend the efforts of our ward PCO in Merton Park, PCSO Nigel Sanders, who carried his own little survey and fed the information back, which rather stacks up with what I've been told too, that we did find through that certain of the lanterns, as they are called, within the lights that have been fitted in the quite recently actually had failed, so that some of our black spots were down to the mechanical failure of the lanterns fitted, and they are now being replaced. So that was a useful exercise, actually.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I was thinking when the questions were submitted that my other question would be answered throughout. So my question isn't directly related to this. So I apologize, you're on your feet a little bit here, but there is an issue around confidence that people feel about in the police, which is related to, but not the same as, feeling safe. And I realise, I completely agree with Councillor McCabe's points made earlier, and I get your difficulty in answering to that. It seems you've also got a difficulty on the other side about conviction rates as well. Noting that you've got that difficult part, are there a few points you can make about where you see your role in increasing the confidence? Because there are things you can do, like those, run and talks and things like that, which are useful, but are there things, strategies about your evidence taking, in kind of bolstering your role so that others can do theirs even better in terms of conviction rates and things that you can communicate to the community that you're doing, as well as being visible, and those other strategies that can help that confidence? Yeah, so where are you gauging in confidence, and what are your strategies to be increasing that confidence? Thank you.
Okay. I don't know whether have you ever looked at the public attitude survey? Because it gives quite a helpful framework to answer some of this question. So it talks about whether you feel that you can rely on your local police. It talks about whether you think they do a good job. It talks about whether you know how to contact them, and those kind of questions. So we use those questions almost to frame some of our activity. So I think, we approach this exactly as you described, really on two main fronts. The first front is that we want people to, if they need us, to feel confident in calling us, that they would want our help, I suppose, for better way of putting it. And then the second thing that I believe will increase confidence over time and will be a kind of antidote to things that are being read in the press is to do a good job for victims. Because that is essentially what people want, is that if they, it's just customer service by any other name. So, and that's the bit that we've really struggled with, I think. And, there's some kind of systemic challenges around communication channels, like calling 101. It's not a great service. And so there's kind of diversification, I think is a better word, of some of those communication channels to help people get the information they need sooner. So, locally, that's what we're really trying to focus on. So we've got 5 focus areas that we look at. And one of the 5 is victim satisfaction, which there's a separate victim satisfaction survey that MOPAT do. And the other one is confidence. And I think if we can flood the community with stories about where things have gone well, then that's going to be helpful. But it is a really difficult challenge at the moment with the things that are happening in other areas to maintain confidence. And I fully understand people's concern and anger about some of the issues. So I want to find some way of acknowledging that and still allowing my officers to do a good job.
Well, just get this back on track. Let's take the written questions and answers first. So Paul, I assume you're not going to go through every one. You'll just get
I'll go through everyone. No. Thank you. 3 I want to ask supplementaries on, please. On numbers, thank you for your response. It is a bit delving. I asked for officer and staff numbers separately. You've combined them. Are you able to give me the officer numbers and the staff numbers separately for those questions?
Sorry,
Sorry, this is my first question on police numbers.
What's not, do you mean by borough rather than by BCU or?
No, I mean officer, and I asked for the officer numbers and staff numbers. You give me the combined figure. In your predecessor, you used to give us officer numbers.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry, I read the question in a different way and read it as officers and staff. But I can send you those figures certainly. But you can assume that there is about off the top of my head probably about 200 staff of that number.
Okay, but you don't have to do it now, because if you could give me the exact figures, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, there are exact figures. They're just as you say combined, but I can split those down. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just incidentally, why I'm very glad to see it, but why do we have more staff than our planned complement? Is that just transitory stage, or?
It's because it's ebbing and flowing every month, I think. So at the moment we're in a season where we're getting a number of new officers a month, but with attrition it would probably start coming down. But actually we do expect to see growth. But the planned complement, the blueprint numbers aren't done that regularly. So this one was probably done about a year after the BCU was created. So I think it's great and that we should expect to see a new establishment number being formed probably from the 1st of April that will then look at that, if you see what I mean.
Okay, and with regard to part D in that, we were told at Locations Board there's a sort of bidding process across London whereby BCUs were bidding for these extra police. And we were told that our BCU had only been successful in getting 30 in Kingston. Is that correct, or is it more complex than that?
Yeah, that's not quite right. It's so we don't bid for. So if you take it back, so 20,000 new officers that were announced nationally, 6,000 of those coming to the Met. We're in the 3rd year of that recruitment programme, and there are 1,800 officers left of that 6,000 to recruit into the Met. We BCUs do not bid for those extra officers. Those are allocated just in terms of need and vacancies, and also taking into account officer preference in terms of travel and so on. What we did bid for, in a sense, was the town centre teams. So this was a complement of 650 officers across London that were already within our existing numbers, and they were allocated to be additional neighbourhood officers. And those officers were divided into two different lots. The first lot was town centre teams, and the second lot was additional dedicated ward officers for wards across London that were really particularly busy. And a process was gone through, an academic process. Sorry, I don't know, my microphone's not very good. An academic process was gone through, and it looked at where the highest harm places were in London that had an identifiable town centre. And our BCU was our Kingston Town Centre was number 30 on that list. But the decision was made that every BCU would have at least one town centre team of the 30 town centre teams. And so we got one for the BCU. And I was not able to select where that went. It was just based on the basis of the figures. So it was Grove Ward in Kingston.
Thank you. On I'm sorry, I don't understand what's happening with regard to the ward panels and the neighbourhood teams. Are we going to align them with the new ward boundaries or not? I asked this a year ago at Locations Board and told that's what would happen. But is that what you're telling me in your answer?
Yes, so that's always been my intention locally, because I don't see any other way forward apart from representing what's actually factually given you the case in terms of the new ward boundaries. There's no point in us trying to pretend that that's not the case and have our officers elsewhere. Centrally, the discussions have been ongoing, but I believe that now they have come to the view that all BCUs will align their neighbourhood teams to the new ward boundaries. What hasn't, the agreement hasn't been reached on whether we'll get any additional officers for those new wards. So in some cases, in some areas of London, new wards are being formed, and the mayor has not made a commitment yet about whether the kind of mayoral promise would continue to have 2 officers for each ward. But long story short, yes, we are reorganising for the new ward boundaries.
Sorry to press you on this, I'm not clear, because this isn't a London-wide reorganisation. This was just, it was Merton's turn to have its boundaries redesignated. That was done. That was a year ago. We had that. What I don't understand is why it's not seamlessly done that within Merton, the ward teams are now going to be aligned to the new boundaries. So I don't understand how local democracy will work with ward panels if we don't have that from this May, when we have the new council teams elected. So this is not a London-wide issue, it's just a Merton issue.
No, it's a London-wide issue and a Merton issue. So
it's not, because not all of London has had new boundaries.
Many boroughs have, many boroughs have. Yes.
Many haven't. But anyway, we've had that for a year. When are we going to actually align them?
So we're aligning them at the moment.
So they will be ready from May, because we were told our panel they wouldn't be. So from May, they will be aligned, will they?
The neighbourhood inspectors have been asked to make that happen, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my last question was related to Ben's, actually. On the other side of the coin, how is morale holding up with you within your teams, within the police, given all that's happening at the moment?
Yeah, so morale is fairly low, because obviously, although there are lots of bad things that have happened, then the vast majority of officers are good and trying to do their best for the community. So it's very difficult, although they, as I said before, they understand how deeply people feel about things, then it's hard for them to read things that they don't feel apply to them. But that, that said, their purpose for doing their job hasn't changed. They're still there to, prevent and reduce crime and to help people. That's why they joined. So they have that strong sense of vocation that you wouldn't necessarily do in other professions. So I think that's helpful. And obviously I'm doing all I can in terms of, passing on any praise from local people, making sure I award borough commander commendations and so on.
Thank you. Can I just say I've had very good reports from parents about these school officers working, so that's worked very well.
Good, thank you.
Coming to general questions, Aidan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Elizabeth, for your work and for the work that your colleagues do. It's really appreciated. We talked a lot about the past and the present. I would like to sort of talk briefly about the future and to understand the thinking with you and your counterparts as well about the rise in cost of living crisis and the effect that will have on crime, both the fear of crime, but also the reporting, and what, if any, initiatives or thoughts collectively with partners have been put together about how to respond to that, because a lot of what potentially we could see will be crimes of opportunity, crimes of circumstance, and as we know, we've already talked about the metal price and etc. The markets will have a further impact on that. It'd be great to hear the conversations, the current thinking that is going on in that space.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So there's lots of things that are putting families into difficulty. The fuel crisis, the war, the general kind of widening social inequality. Acquisitive crime is still heavily linked to the drug market, for example, as well as need. So there are things that we can still continue to do to keep acquisitive crime down that doesn't necessarily involve the average person. We're contributing to some work that's organised by MOPAC, which is London's anchor institutions network work, which you may be aware of. So that's bringing together, obviously, organisations that have a social responsibility across London, and as well as some of the more kind of strategic schemes. There are schemes around widening mentoring, and importantly, trying to enlist large numbers of corporates across London to offer apprenticeship and other job opportunities, because we have to be able to offer an alternative. What we're doing in the slightly shorter term in terms of diversion is we're making use of funds such as the Cognitive Behavioural Therapy Fund that's just been announced, which means that we can nominate young people who might otherwise be involved in crime to essentially receive extra support from partners. So it is something we're very conscious of, and just from a kind of trust and confidence perspective, what I want to really make sure of is that we don't start over policing certain communities compared to others. So I'm very aware of that.
Thank you. Just a brief follow-up. It'd be good to understand. I mean, if you've got anything that you could circulate about that, the cognitive behaviour reference, that'd be fantastic to understand a bit further. And again, thank you very much for this answer and all your other answers.
Yeah, no, of course, I'll send that via Rosie. Yep.
There's still a lot of complaints among local people that they never see a policeman on the road. The police ride these days, they don't walk. Wouldn't it be a good idea that they linger a bit instead of riding down the road, riding up? People say, I never see a policeman on this road. I say, yes, I see them there. He said, I don't see any. Always complaints, but they never see. What can you do can you do anything about that, or is just the way things are going to be?
Yeah, so it's certainly a question that's often. More police officers, yeah. Yes, that'd be lovely. It's a question that is often answered. I think, you know, if you're a response team officer and you're driving around in your fast car with your blue lights flashing, that does make you more visible than neighbourhood officers. You do have here, which I should have mentioned to in answer to the councillor's earlier question, you do also have a neighbourhood tasking team that are based out of Mitcham Police Station, who are doing some really, really good work for you here in the borough at the moment. And they are often out on the streets in addition to the neighbourhood officers. The difficulty we've got there, I'm afraid, is that they do about half of their policing operations in uniform and half of them not in uniform. However, I think the operations that are not in uniform, the days of those might be numbered, because I understand that a lot of the local community who they might want to approach now knows who they are. So, which is quite interesting. So I've been involved in a mentoring program with some young people working with Merton Council. And it's gone really well, actually. So we've talked about perceptions of stop and search and how we can build trust and confidence. And they talk about seeing too many police officers and know them all by name. But I think coming full circle on that answer, I would really like more neighbourhood officers. And so I undertook to fill the schools roles, the neighbourhood ward officer roles, which I've done. And now, if I have any opportunity at all, I'll keep adding to that tasking team to increase officers here.
So, no more questions for the Borough Commander? Can I say that the more our Borough Commanders come to see us, the more we get to more our confidence in them grows. So I think we do have a lot of confidence in what you're doing, your team, in pretty difficult circumstances, which we greatly appreciate. So.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, I would really welcome having telephone calls from anyone in this room if there's anything that you want to chat over. Because I know that sometimes the local teams are equipped with answers on some of the more strategic and resource-based points, and sometimes they aren't. So I'm always happy to answer those. And I will make sure I break down the officer and staff members and get those sent over as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And do please, yes, we do appreciate you coming along in person, and we do appreciate you've got a wide remit. So giving us this amount of attention is much appreciated by us all. Thank you. Sally.
Chair, can I just say to the Borough Commander, you said you're happy to accept phone calls. I don't know that I have your number, and I appreciate you can't give it out in a public meeting. Perhaps if you could email it to Peter, who could share it with us. Would that be acceptable, please?
Yes, very happy.
So there we are. This is, I think, the shortest meeting I've ever chaired, and I know whether it will gladden the heart of my vice chair, if not warm the cockles of his heart, because it is bloody freezing in here, isn't it? But it was not intended to be as short as this. I have to tell you that there were two items we should have been looking at: the equality and community cohesion strategy, and the overview and scrutiny annual report. So, ending on a slightly grumpy note, I'm saying I am handing on some unfinished business to my successor, and I apologize for that. I don't like doing that. I would have liked to have had these things wrapped up within the life of this council, you know, and it's not down to our hardworking frontline scrutiny officers. I think they haven't always had the level of support that would have helped them to do their job properly. So those of you who remain on the commission into the next council, do please keep an eye on the work programme, make sure things are happening when they should. You know, I do care about all this, but I have to pass it on to you now to make sure that scrutiny continues to be an important function in the way we run the council here. It has been very important to me, and it's evolved in a lot of ways, some of them good, and it matters. It does make a difference to the life of our council and the way we govern ourselves. So, and the other thing, of course, if you haven't filled in that scrutiny survey, and I know lots of you did because you did that to help you get through the budget council meeting. But if it is still outstanding, do please make sure that they come in, because the response rate is still not good. So,
Chair, I think it would be remiss of us not to thank all those members who are standing down, but in this particular commission, not to thank you for your very thorough and diligent and conscientious contribution to the work of the council over many years. And yes, it's true, I do move through meetings at a different pace, but I appreciate the extent to which you provide and have provided members with the opportunity to really dig and delve into the work of those that we are here to scrutinise. So I will miss you, and I would like to, on behalf of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, thank you. And I think Ben's the only other member that I'm aware. Oh, John, you're stepping down as well. So, I mean, I think we should thank all those members for their contribution. And, you know, making the work of a councillor is difficult and requires long hours and the ability to withstand sub-zero temperatures in meetings, and I think we are not always appreciated, but I hope you three will feel appreciated this evening. So thank you.
big thank you for those kind words. Appreciate it.